Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight for the second installment of the series Critical Practice. We'd like to thank the school, especially Eva and Manijay, for having confidence in our initiative and sharing our enthusiasm for it. So my name is Luvi DiMarco, and together with Tobias Henser Dausgaard and Arya Arab Shahi, we've organized this series in search for a more proactive mode of practice. So Critical Practice series is a call to reimagine the relationships between the profession and the networks of actors and conditions that surround it. So together with architects, designers, planners, and economists who are piloting new models for engaging with the public realm, we will have an open conversation about common challenges and exemplary initiatives. In discovering ways to have a more nuanced impact on the built environment, we unfold three themes that we believe have the potential to redefine the future role of the architect. Forms of alliance, which will happen tonight, rethinking clients, which happened 2 weeks ago, and a third conversation around the topic of affording risk, which will take place in February. So to tonight's topic, how do we form alliances, both with alien and familiar actors? Or in other words, how do we collaborate, and with whom and how, in order to strengthen our role as architects and designers, and ease a path towards a common vision for a greater public good? So this discussion will rethink the conventional forms of collaboration and explore forms of non-monetary value, common values, and trust. I'll now hand the session over to Tobias, who will introduce tonight's guests and chair this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. So, hi and welcome. We've looked much forward to tonight and to welcome this fantastic panel of speakers. We have asked each participant to present their position and their work through the theme of forms of alliance and ways of... Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. And following the presentations that each participant will give, we will open up the discussion to the floor for everybody to join in and take part in the conversation. So I would like to first present the speakers. So in this corner over here we have Finn Williams, who is co-founder and CEO of Public Practice. So he previously worked at OMA, General Public Agency, Croydon Council, and the GLA. Finn sits on the Rainsford Review Task Force, PAS Board, RIBA Planning Group, and the Working in the Public Interest Advisory Group. He's a visiting professor at the Institute of Innovation and Public Purpose, a tutor at the RCA, and was a co-curator of the British Pavilion at the 2016 Venice Architectural Biennale. And next to him we have Pooja Agrawal, who is a co-founder of Public Practice and works in the GLA Regeneration Team, overseeing strategy, policy, and projects in Northwest London. She previously worked at Publica and remade that. Pooja is a trustee of the Museum of Architecture, member of DSE Review Panel, a mentor at the Stephen Lawrence Trust, a fellow at the Institute of Innovation and Public Purpose, and an advocate for diversity in the built environment sector. She was nominated for the Planners Woman of Influence 2018. And next to Pooja, we have Freek Persson, who graduated in 1997 from the St. Lucas School of Architecture in Brussels. And very soon after graduating, he co-founded 51 in 4E, a Brussels-based international practice that contributes, through means of design, to social and urban transformation. Parallel to his activities at 51 in 4E, he has been performing in international academia. And next to Freek, we have Rory McGrath, who founded the London-based design studio OKIM in 2008, together with Oliver Knight. OKIM is engaged in ongoing partnerships with artists, curators, editors, architects, designers, and institutions. The clients and commissioners include Alix, J.W. Anderson, the Guggenheim, the Met, and Het Neuve Institute, alongside collaborations with artists including Fuss, Jürgen Teller, and Shizad Dawood. As creative directors and partners of Real Review, OKIM explore what it means to live today, and as founders of their publishing house, In Other Words, they create books and other printed matter in close collaboration with artists and other cultural protagonists. And last, we would like to present to you Flavien Minu, who is a London-Paris-based architect with a postgraduate dual degree in urban policies from Sciences Po and LSE. Alongside his practice Office for Cities that aims to drive urban changes by bridging architecture, politics, and economics, Flavien is a writer and has been invited to intervene at Harvard Kennedy School, Columbia GSAP, ETH Zurich, and Architectural Association. He recently released the book New Commons for Europe. Where we had announced that Bandelhuber was part of the original team, he is now, he had a last minute cancellation, but we are super excited that Rory and Flavien could join this talk. So please give the panel a hand, and then we'll start with the presentations. So. Would you like to start, Finn? Okay.
And people, I guess, increasingly moving away from the centre, and instead of finding new languages of discussions from more extreme positions, people are finding safety in echo chambers and creating sort of parallel worlds of realities. And what is happening at this kind of political, macro, global scale, I think is also happening at micro scale. On a personal level, where people have stopped talking to their grandparents and they don't Google Brexit, or at a professional level, and we're at this kind of extreme, at this point of extreme lack of empathy, lack of trust, and I think a lack of alliance. And this sort of antagonism at a kind of professional scale, professional level, came to light recently over the proposed demolition of Fiori Taha 15 Falkenberg Close, which I'm sure you all are aware of. And my Twitter feed, which is probably straddling two world echo chambers of planners and architects, became this really weird, like, world of hatred between architects and planners, and also the public sector and private sector. So planners were tweeting, oh, classic architects, you know, they think they're above the law, they can do what they want to. And architects were tweeting, actually I quite like this one, planners are municipal sphincter clenching bureaucratic scum. So this fractured relationship, I guess, is not really that much of a surprise, where architecture has arguably become increasingly commercialized, and this sort of overused term architect has come to being, where the architect takes all the credit, or a single architect takes all the credit. It's not like they're doing a really big team in a practice, not to mention the kind of interns, but also the larger team of engineers, contractors, and let's not forget the clients. And then there's the other side of austerity that has shrunken the public sector's capacity, leaving a kind of public planning system that seems quite slow or bureaucratic. So we have this kind of this architect versus the sphincter clenching bureaucrat, which could be the next theme for your party, the AA. And I think if we think about this kind of loss of agency of the profession, this is also quite apparent in how the profession has been broken down into multiple consultants, from the kind of project manager to a surveyor. And there's a kind of mistrust that underlines this whole building process. And for me, when I think about my part 3, it was all about learning how not to be liable and how to push the responsibility onto other parties. And this sort of broken, uncollaborative approach, I think, leads to really devastating consequences of, you know, of the Grenfell Tower disaster, where, you know, no one's actually been able to say what went wrong or who is responsible. And also the consequence of this is society has totally lost trust of our profession. And again, this new, the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, which again I'm sure you all know about, the kind of one of the main roles of this commission is to ensure new development expectations so that communities don't resist new developments. And again, frustratingly, it sort of has boiled down to a style war, and this kind of vision of Prince Charles's England is refueling this hatred between the profession, the government, and society. So the question really today, I think, is how do we build new form of alliances? How do we redefine our profession? How do we work across boundaries? And also how do we bridge bridges between the public and the private sector? But also, how do we learn to listen? How do we become humble? And how do we build trust in society as a whole? And maybe public practice is one way of doing that.
I think we can almost stop there, but I can also go into a bit of detail about
I think that would
what
be good.
Public Practice is doing.
Yeah.
So, as people with backgrounds in architecture, both Pooja and I started public practice just over a year ago now, in a way to bridge some of those disciplinary divides or fragmentation that Pooja just talked about. So what we do is we place talented built environment practitioners on year-long placements on the front line of local government, and that's really to rebuild the public sector's capacity to plan proactively. This is our first cohort, and public practice isn't just about architects, it's about bringing together these kinds of disciplines more beyond them. So housing experts, conservation officers, urban designers, policy specialists, surveyors, and critically people who don't necessarily feel like they fall into one of those categories, people who are interested in moving between them. And those associates, as we call them, dedicate 10% of that year to a program of collective research and development. So these are the skill sets of the first 17 associates around a number of competencies which we've devised that we think make the kind of ultimate public servant. And I think what's important is they're all coming from a very different position, but collectively through that research and development program, they're able to build and broaden each other's skills and develop a kind of new form of collaborative practice. And that means sometimes making alliances between different authorities that they're working with but facing similar issues. So we hope that that 10% of the time becomes a kind of like a shared R&D department for local government. They also are able to use their placements themselves, so that's the other 90% of the time, to form different kinds of alliances within their placements. So to just give you a few examples of that, this is Ione Braddock. So Ione is an architect who used to work at Archeo. She's now working in Epping Forest District Council, first time designer ever has worked there in living memory. I suppose she's forming this alliance sometimes between the associate, the officer, and the architect, where in some cases you're able to kind of gang up on a developer to where you both have something in the same, you both have a common interest. In some cases it's freeing up architects to do the kind of work they wanted to do, but don't have the license to do because they're a developer. So part of that is working with setting up the first design review panel that I think Forest have had, whatever, bringing architects onto that, but then using that to work with what would have been very run-of-the-mill developments, and kind of unlocking the ambition that's there somewhere with the architects that are behind the scene. Then you get people like Tom Fox. So Tom Fox, I think, has taught here, teaches here, studied here, and he's used to work at Wilkins Brown. He's now working in this interesting role, forming an alliance between two different authorities, St Albans and Dacorum. And because he's coming from the position of public practice, he's able to almost switch hats, like swap his lanyard from being a St Albans officer to a Dacorum officer to a public practice officer. And he's working in this kind of fuzzy zone in between both authorities, where there's a huge urban extension plan for Hemel Hempstead of thousands of homes. And a lot of his work is just about rewiring the different authorities, the way they deal with each other. This is him pulling together all the different work streams of both of those authorities across this huge master plan area, work that has never been done before, and a coordination that has never been done before, not really useful but critical. Hannah Lambert. So Hannah used to work at LLDC, London Legacy Development Corporation, and is now at Newham. And Hannah's forming an alliance with Lyon's first council-led estate regeneration project, Custom House, and she's sort of pioneering a kind of co-produced approach with the local community group Peach, and being a kind of conduit between the authority and that community group where possible, including doing things like working with the community to elect a representative who then sits on really important in-house processes like the selection of consultants. And finally, Lynn Chia and Sophie Palmer, actually two associates working in different placements. Lynn is working in the GLA, Sophie Palmer is an architect working in Bexley, and they're both working on a project in Northern Riverside, but the alliances they're forming is really between different departments or silos spread across those authorities. They're actually bringing together individuals from, planning, but also housing and land, health, communities, culture, also students from universities to map an industrial area and really understand the local economy. So getting people to tread the streets, but do that collectively as a team, and think, I suppose, reorder the way a council works from being lots of vertical silos to be more horizontal place-based kind of network. And an example of that where they took that to the next level and to bring it back to Brussels as well is a field trip that the associates organised, bringing together officers from 7 different authorities to go to Brussels to look at examples of industrial intensification and co-location, and created that kind of space for a conversation to happen that just genuinely doesn't happen normally within local government. So you very rarely get the excuses to meet people from neighbouring authorities, let alone spend a whole day on the Eurostar going back and forth. So I suppose that's where I wanted to end. I think we're only a year in. We're actually only 8 months into the first placement, but we're seeing that this kind of cohort approach is creating a different kind of network. We know that local government, as we understood it, will pretty much cease to exist given where austerity is heading, where government policy is heading. So what kind of new, more networked form of local government could we create that does start to form those alliances between different sectors, different disciplines and different communities?
And over to you. Thanks, Finn. Over to you and Pooja. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Luc Freek-Persijn, one of the partners of 51 Employee based in Brussels. I will talk from my personal perspective as an architect, a practicing architect, based in Brussels, having a lot of work in Albania, amongst others. And in that sense, it is important to say that 2 conditions, Brussels and Albania, and 2 stages of France, conditions where the idea that the public sector is dwindling is less strong than I think in the UK. In Belgium, for sure, there's a strong belief that public sector has a role and can add something meaningful. The same goes, I think, for Albania, where they have a collapse of government, where they are trying to rebuild this public sector. So in that sense, I think a different type of conversation is the one that you're having. We are architects working on architecture. This is a private house, reconversion of an old man building, a high-rise building, public space, also strategic planning. So I show this to say that I think it is possible to practice as an architect, at least in the parts of the world I'm from. And the question that you're posing of whether this practice is also critical, I think that's the topic of today. And I brought one example, which I think is, to me, a good example of how practice can, how you can work with this kind of tension between practicing and being critical. Because being critical is, of course, trying to ask questions, disagree with something, which I think is an essential part of the job. But practicing also means accessing the situation. So trying to engage, not position when we were studying the strategic potential of sites in Brussels, this came across as one of the sites because it's such a dramatic place, and at the same time it's also a very accessible place. So it's a place with a lot of trauma, but also a place with a lot of potential because it has a scale that a lot of Brussels doesn't have. So this is an image of this study, Brussels 2014, where we imagined that the business district could be inspired, could have draw its inspiration from Sevilla University, which is basically programming unused space in a business district as a kind of overlaying of a pedagogical model. And this is something we tried a year and a half ago, being a teacher for the University of Hasselt, organizing a 3-week workshop on site on the 19th floor of the World Trade Center. A workshop which was both a studio with students and also a series of public conversations and a small exhibition in a building which was running vacant. And this kind of model of being a teacher continued with the second studio on the 23rd floor for the University of Hasselt as well. This first event a year and a half ago made us get in contact with Afro North, which was a non-profit organized by the 8 big property owners of this business district. And we negotiated 1-year lease, 1-year occupation of the 16th floor of the same World Trade Center. So that's the floor that you see here. We didn't do this alone. We were together with Afro North, this non-profit organization, also with Architecture Work Group and with Ramon Ramon. So 4 organizations occupying the 16th floor in the idea of organizing temporary occupation for 1 year. But also using this situation of being on the place for 1 year, of experimenting and trying out different ways of inhabiting such a tower. In our case, using a lot of green to change the climate of the tower. So it was also an experiment on site. The third role we had, I think, is being an activist, in the sense that this organization, or this alliance between 4 smaller organizations, one of the parties was Afro North, and they stand for the 8 big property owners, which are, let's say, the big players in Brussels. They have huge quantities of square meters. And suddenly we were making a joint program which would eventually also link us to more cultural and pedagogical and territorial institutions in Brussels around one question, the question of testing for 1 year a more diverse way of occupying these towers, not by having a long conversation, but giving the space, asking the space, negotiating the space to try it for 1 year free, which was 8,000 square meters of group of people, of an handful of people, every week on this floor. Also changed the discussion on how this project you can see here in this small model, how to reimagine these towers. Being on site, being part of a group of people activating the tower, I think we really managed together with the client to not go for a tabula rasa model, which was they intended to demolish the whole site, and we now end up with a project which reuses 60% of the existing structure, which is for a neighborhood like this where every building is demolished, slightly treated like products. I think will have a huge difference. We have also been exhibition designer for the exhibition that Architecture Locally has created, and for which OPRM has done the wayfinding, the public campaign, the voices, you could say. We have done the design of the 23rd floor as a cultural co-working space, so an exhibition space which is not only a place to show, but also a place to work together, to do seminars, and to use this huge amount of space to bring people together. Where a mock-up that we had made for the architectural project actually became part of the exhibition, and where a test of opening windows in the tower became part of a new experience. It does not communicate like this because the architecture competition is confidential, it's private. But it was also an exhibition that produced a new experience that allowed people to feel how the tower could become more than just a workspace, and could also be what you see here, a kind of very generous domestic space. Finally, the last role, the role of the urban gardener, which was a role that some people in the office took up on their own initiative. So this was a call that was launched to use this public. That's the space on the 3rd floor. It's a space that was initially imagined as the public space of the district, raised from the cars, but never really used as a public space because the bridges leading to it never got built. And so it was a huge surface, and a group of 15 associations tied in to make for one summer an urban garden. And so a lot of people from the office engaged in that endeavor, producing with almost nothing, I think, an experience which was in the end very, very rich. And so if you talk about the new role of the architect, the new role of the practice, the one thing I can give as a part of the discussion is that something that I find very interesting is to take up multiple roles and to find yourself in situations where your relationship to the other changes, and where if one part of the conversation is no longer possible in one role, it can almost step into the other role to find other spaces, other conditions to continue that conversation. Of course, it comes with a lot of ambiguity, and that's maybe what I would like to bring in as a topic of conversation today, is that I think this ambiguity, rather than being a problem or being something that should be considered as a negative point, of not being clear, of not being transparent, but of somehow being ambiguous, that I think it can be very important to value it, at least to discuss it. And since I find it such an important discussion, I wanted to bring it to the discussion.
Thank you. And then we will go to Rory.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here amongst so many architects. I'm the only non-architect here, I believe, which is a great joy. So, just to talk a little bit about, maybe we see our time as actually, we understand that it's extremely crucial time, but actually we see our time full of possibilities. So I'm one half and director of OKRM, And I'd like to just show a few parts of our work, and just talk a little bit about how we see the position that we're working within. This time is a great moment for radical ideas. We have an immense amount of new technologies constantly emerging. We have confronted with an immense plethora of alternative forms of living, new relationships with each other, and of course with material reality. And in that sense, as much as it can be an era of doubt, we try to find optimism within that. One of the things that we do with OKRM is we form alliances. We don't call them alliances in our field, we call those generally collaborations, but there certainly are forms of alliance. What we do, and one of the things which I think we're maybe known for, is creating around our projects a form of culture. So we tend to form a particular way of thinking, of sharing, a way of working together with various others. So just to carry on from where Frick has done, this is the project that occurred within the WTC, the World Trade Center in Brussels, and it was part of the Rotterdam Architectural Biennale last year. Our role here was ambiguous, but at the same time, ambiguous, there you go. That's something we also take great pleasure in. I guess we almost thrive in ambiguous circumstances, which is something that, again, if you're going to see our era as positive, you have to see ambiguity as a great thing. So our role here was to define a voice. Yes, we used graphic design, which is our main tool, but really what we did is thought very, very hard about how does this building communicate, how does this project communicate. So there's various levels to this project, and you could say there's a procedural voice which guides you around the building. There's a narrative idea which talks about the key ideas and the key reason why you should be in this building. And then there's, of course, the functional aspects which make sure you don't get lost. And the idea of the World Trade Center in Brussels is it's an immense building. It's the kind of building you don't get to work in if you live in a city like London. You tend to work in the little the corners of the city, generally. But it's an immense space, and it's also a free space, a space for questioning ideas and for critical thought, and for new ideas. So the idea was, of course, to try and bring as many people from the outside in to enjoy this debate. So the public campaign drifted in and outside, inside and outside of the building. We work a lot with brands. We are not necessarily branding designers, but we work within the space of the brand. And the space of the brand is an incredibly rich space to be working in at this moment in time. Mainly because the space of the brand, and especially within fashion, which Alix is part of, is a huge space. It used to be a lot smaller, and now with the plethora of communication tools, with the amount of money that's within fashion, there's a lot of possibilities. What we do when we tend to start working with people is we tend to define a kind of manifesto, which I showed at the beginning there. And then what we do with Alix is absolutely everything. So we work on every single piece of hardware, we work on every single piece of communication, packaging, spatial projects. We commission architects, we commission artists, writers, journalists, photographers, various kinds of manufacturers, various kinds, craft-based and industrial manufacturers. And what we do is we use that in order to blur the boundaries between our disciplines, and in a sense to create a community and a dialogue and a culture. This is just putting a little more emphasis on one of the spatial projects which we've developed with, we commissioned Hesselbrand, who are collaborators of ours who studied at the school. It's an interesting situation outside. Real Londoner just drifting past that. We also work with other architects, for example, with the Design Museum when it moved to its new locations in Kensington. We worked with architects Sam Jacobs Schutte importantly, our role here was to develop a kind of mood for the exhibit, which is often a way of working. It's less about, say, graphic design or graphics. It's more about defining a kind of art direction or an idea, which then other practitioners and work within, and very closely with the curator, Justin McGrath, in this case. We're also partners with Jack Self, who is also alumni and teacher at the AA, on Real Review. Real Review is simply what it means to live today, and it's an incredible project to be part of, because it constantly keeps you in touch with the ongoing dialogue and the mood of now, but also it puts you in a position where you're discussing propositions instead of dwelling in say, the doubt of now. We're talking about what is next, what are we doing with this time we're in. We were a member of the team of the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale 2016 with Finn, who's one of the curators, Home Economics. And our role was, on one hand, graphic designers. On the other hand, we were considered as, I hate to say it, but kind of artists, because we created a kind of work which was considered an artwork, which was a trick in a way, or a tactic, in order to have the institution embrace a completely discrete and powerful idea outside of the graphic design, or outside of the identity, which dealt with the curatorial proposition about the home. And these are a series of images that we made with a photographer called Matthew Devonshie. And lastly, we're also a publishing house, and we formed this as a means to create alliance with artists, writers, curators, in order to create a free space to develop ideas outside of the realms of the institution, and in a sense outside of bureaucracy, and maybe a bit more of a free space to develop specific ideas. So I guess why I'm here and what I look forward to sharing with the panel is of course, what is it to be part of a team? What is it to be an architect in relation to other practitioners? And how do we merge our ideas, and how do we merge our practices, and how do we thrive on ambiguity?
Thank you very much. And then Leo?
Hi, hello. Is this working? Yeah, okay. Thanks for all your presentations. Thanks for the invitation. Really glad to be at the table. I've taken the subject quite as a good student, let's say, but also because I think alliances are really part of my job at some point. So I'm architect. I've been trained as architect, graduated as an architect. In France, you can afford to be graduated in architect because schools are free. And then I went to Sciences Po Paris, political science school, and then I finished this long journey in London School of Economics at the LSE in London. So I have this kind of interesting background between like being an architect, like creative, maybe at some point, but also start to understand the logic of our world in terms of politics, but in terms of economics. It doesn't mean that architects does not understand this, but just like when you spend 2 years of your life, you have like some knowledge about this. I'm still learning. I'm now taking course of finance and real estate because I think it's a quite interesting world to be in, and like you never stop learning at some point. So the two parts of this talk are divided between like what we call the good sometimes and what we call the bad. I can't really define what is good, what is bad. Everyone has his own opinion of what is good, what is bad, but I've just tried to play with these two definitions. First, alliances for the good. I will talk about a project that we started here with Peter Swinen 2 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe? Yeah, 3 years ago. It was a teaching unit called Oracles for Europe. It was really interesting because at that time the European subject was not so much on the table, but he suddenly arrived on the table the day of the opening ceremony at the AA because that was the day of the Brexit. So that was the day of the Brexit, like when the UK voted Brexit, that was opening exhibition, ERDAA. So we kind of celebrate that day at some point. What was really interesting in this unit, we had like great students. Some of them are here, really close, I would like to say. It was not only a unit, there was also a discussion program. So we invited many different people from London, but also from elsewhere. Here you see Chris Dercon. That was a really interesting day, like Chris Dercon only for us in a small room. Nobody else from the school came, like really surprisingly. He was announced, but like you never know. And during one of these conversations, we also had Anthony Ng Mikok, which is now teacher here, and we had a really interesting discussion about like engaged practice and how to engage the architectural discipline to our more responsibilities toward the society and toward the territories. And interestingly enough, we were speaking with Anthony from Assemble, and I was telling him, like, you know, there are like a kind of emerging practices all over Europe, like yours. It could be interesting to meet all together and to just, you know, to make networks and to find alliances, and also to meet people who have like the same kind of attitude all over Europe. So from this idea, we organized the Bedford Tapes, ERDAA. Few people on the panel were there. So it was like, maybe not for the first time, but like a really good, interesting days of discussion where engaged practices from all over Europe came for one day of discussion, everyone presenting one project, only for 15 minutes, and then having a discussion of like 45 minutes. That was really interesting because suddenly it was not about like the project, but it was about like the condition of practices, the attitude that these practices have shaped over the condition, but also the economy. It means how do you sustain engagement over time? So I won't be too long about this, but that was a really interesting day. Also a really critical day, because I think for making alliances, you don't have to be always like agree with someone. I think conflict is also part of like constructive alliances, and everything has been witnessed on that book called Newcomers for Europe. And yeah, it's I mean, it's a really interesting settings. We work with Wayne Daly for the graphic designer, who was really helpful. Like the alliance with graphic design is also really helpful because it helps you to communicate your idea. Sometimes you're in the midst of your project and it's really hard to get the things out. And what is interesting here is like it's also made for lazy reader, because on the left-hand page you always have a black page, and with few sentences and few moments that doesn't really belong only to the architectural world, but also to a kind of a mix of economics, reaction, politics, sensation. And suddenly it was all these people around the table from kind of different background, and yeah, kind of for the first time making a pool all together. And after the book, it was different events organized, one at the Venice Biennale, and the idea was to kind of bring this pool of people, bring these alliances. We first make ERDAA and start to pull all some other people at different place and in different situation everywhere in Europe. So the first one was in Belgium, in Venice, sorry, for the Belgian pavilion. The second one was in Belgium at the World Trade Center with the invitation of the curator of the Biennale. The third one was in Amsterdam with the Act for Democracy workshop organized by the Rem Koolhaas, Wolfgang Tillmans and Stefan Peterman. And the fourth one was at Gothenburg with Marcus Missen and a few other curators from Europe. So it's really interesting to see how an alliances could also like being brought forward, and you know, you start to pull, and you also start to see the roots of these alliances taking place and taking shape in different cities. The second part of the talk is alliances with the devil, which is also part of my daily job. So what you see in the background here and what you clearly see here is what we call a discounted cash flow. So this is really important concept, let's say, because it's the international language of business. when you speak to someone into business, when he look at you, when he look at your project, in his head, he doesn't look at your image or your plan, or he's thinking about like his cash flow. He's thinking about like the present value, the future value, the yield or the rent passing, and how the money will evolve over time. So that could be really harsh. It's kind of really hardcore things, but it's also a really important language to get into it, because if you integrate, if you understand this kind of language, then you can also bring forward your ideas at some point. And I will show you quickly 4 examples of this. So that was the first project. I'm not showing any architectural renderings because I'm not architect and I don't really, I'm not responsible for the imagery, but what I'm showing you is like the hardcore part of the project and how the projects are made, and also how we can influence the quality of the project by active upstream on the project. So that was Place Mazas. There is a new type of competition in France where there is a site and you have to bid with the developers, with an architect and with a team of people. And you have to bid with a price, but also a price that will evolve over time, a price of the rent, a price of the building. So it's suddenly not only during a project, an architectural project, it's like giving a big package with everything. So this project, the main idea of this project, so it's what we call in real estate a prime site. So it's really on the River Seine. It's at the crossroad on the River Seine and the Bassin de l'Arsenal. There is no neighborhood. I mean, around this area, the square meters is around like 15,000 euros per square meter, which is kind of a lot for Paris. Not so much for London, but for Paris it's almost the highest price. And what we decided with the developers, it's like, because the site is this circle, but it's all this area. And we have decided that it was impossible to build this area because it's on Haussmann axis, and it's also a former public space which is like now underdeveloped, but that really belongs to the public. So what we decided to do is like only building half of the project and then making a kind of a juridical framework and complex financial model to rent the other parts for 15 days and then to give it back to the public. And we won. We won with a price of 15 million euros. It's really interesting because we won against people who bet with a price between 35 million and 15 million euros. So it's really interesting that, and maybe that's the first time, that a bet won with a price which is not the highest bid. I will go forward just to also make some, because I think talking about money is a bit hardcore, but it's also really important, and also it gives you value of things. So 50 million, for example, is the price of the building, which is just here. This is not from me, this is from CroStar, which is a real estate database. And you can see here like the building which is like next road is like 15 millions, and it's almost the same size as this school. It's just to give you ideas of the values of things and of architecture. The second project is Paul Bourget. Paul Bourget is a really derelicted area in Paris with a lot of social housing, and the competition was for office space, 10,000 square office space, and then with another developer we did the same bid, so we only build 5,000 square meters and we retribute the rest to social activities, sport facilities, and we make a lot of alliances with the surroundings to be sure that it's going to be part of the project. So this one we bid for 10 millions and we lost it. We lost it against someone who bid for 35 millions. So these guys won with like a 15,000 square meters offices building. No relationship with the public space, no relationship with the area, but he bid the highest bid and he won it. The third project, it's Gare des Gobelins, and this time we have decided to be the client. So with my office, we bid for the project as clients, But we didn't do it as a really naive way. First of all, we met the CEO of SNCF Immobilier, which was like the shareholder and the owner of the site. And then we also make a study about like who owns this place, how is this place is working, because it's a huge site. It's 70,000 square meters in the heart of Paris, so probably the last hugest site in Paris. And what we saw during the 6 months of studies, it's a mix of shareholders. It's a big history and really complex history of public-private partnerships. And it's also a lot of trial and courts and everything. So for us, it was clear that selling this site to a new developer was a big mistake. So what we tried to do is we made a team of architects, but also urban planners, not developers, city makers, people with experience in doing alternative ways of making cities. So Frick was the architects, and we discussed for a long time about this project because of their ability to make such a huge project, but also the ability to deal with the developer and not be afraid of the ambiguity. And we proposed €1. So that was the price for the bid. We are still waiting for the answer, but we had some question about the price, so we answered the question. We made economic model, we made juridical framework, and we are still waiting for the answer right now. But I think it's the right price for that site, actually.
Yeah, time-wise, maybe we will need to cut to the questions. But thank you so much for all the presentations. And we will now move to a question round. First, if I can ask a question, I was really intrigued with this idea about ambiguity. And I think also that ties maybe a bit to this temporary space. So I'm curious what this word ambiguity means, both in terms of roles, different roles we can occupy. I know for OKRM and also 51 Employee, like you would, with different collaborators, even with the same collaborator, sometimes have a different role in that relationship. So if you could speak a little more about this ambiguity, I would be very curious to hear about that. And also the notion of trust that I think also very much Pooja's and Finn's presentation spoke to. So this space of ambiguity, how do you navigate in that? For any takers?
There's many things to say about ambiguity. So I don't know where to start.
So I think like just for the VTC, for instance, like you have a building for a short period of time where there is like this time window for certain types of collaborations, where I guess you would both be the facilitator in some way. You would also be contributing with content.
Okay. Maybe I'll respond to your question about ambiguity, also in relation to what Flavien has shown. Because what Flavien is showing is indeed looking for situations where it's not entirely clear what your role is and the kind of value that comes with that. And you were referring to the developers as someone who looks at everything with, and he somehow x-rays everything, he or she x-rays everything with financial value, which is indeed the typical role you would, or the typical image you would associate with the developer, that this is what they want to do, and this is what they cannot stop themselves from doing. And we find
so this transaction, which is not necessarily based on money, or this like it is more based on a trust that develops over time. What is your experience in public practice with the close collaboration, I guess, with a lot of different actors within an authority and within a community?
If I just pick up on the kind of developer's point of view, I think they're also working in a structure of ambiguity. This idea of what future value is totally ambiguous. You know, it's situated in a much larger political structural economic world. So this idea that anything is fixed is not true. And as architects, therefore, it's part of our role that to kind of create a joint vision and sort of work towards that in a world where everything is can be defined and redefined. So just sort of talking all about that something that came to my mind. But yeah, I think like all the associates in public practice, but also both of our experiences work in public sector, we're always in the situation where you learn how to speak different languages, because everyone looks at things from a completely different perspective and have completely different ambitions for the same place or for the same neighborhood. So I think that idea of building trust is really, really important, and it sort of goes back to what I was saying about being able to listen to people who you don't sort of assume an economic view on their side, just to try and understand what different perspectives are to be able to get self-identity.
And I think that results in collective projects that aren't necessarily falling neatly on a shared purpose or common agenda. For me, that's what's interesting about you talking about alliances rather than collaboration. Collaboration somehow suggests that we're all working together on producing something new. Alliance, certainly when I think of it in a kind of global global political sense, suggests that there's a kind of alignment, a convenient alignment with interests, which may actually be pointing in different directions overall, but just might come together around a certain issue. And to be able to identify where you might align your interests with others, you need to not just speak their language, but really think about what's driving them, whether it's the numbers or actually you want to get away from the numbers and the need to, and the kind of dream that they were really working for Compassion House or something else, or where they want to position themselves. And once you're in that meeting room with the landholder, the community representative, the finance officer, the transport consultant, and you realise what everyone's aiming at, the then skill is to find where you can just get all of those alignments in place, and then what you can make out of that.
I just like to ask a question. I think when you present Freak as well, it makes me sort of think that also in relation to what is an alliance and what is a collaboration. In this case, it's quite clearly an alliance. And for me, what's where the ambiguity for me lies in is that it's an alliance with a potentially quite dangerous partner in a way. And you describe the kind of role of the architect as being slightly not at the center or being slightly off-center somehow, which is also very close to being completely sidelined somehow during the course of that process. I'm just quite curious to hear how you would try to kind of mediate that in the process of forming this alliance. What kind of stops do you have to make sure that something good actually rises from the public out of this and just not kind of a reciprocal rent between you and quite a dangerous developer and a big commercial architect?
Yeah, it's true that in this project or in this situation, it is not really a project. Yeah, there's obviously the fear of being instrumentalized, but there's also the fear of instrumentalizing others. And to be honest, we don't have, I don't have any, I cannot guarantee any, there is no stops for this type of fear, I think. I cannot guarantee that I don't instrumentalize others, and I cannot guarantee that I will not be instrumentalized. So this is, I think, part of the constant tension of this project, and a tension which requires constant negotiation there's obviously also things that do not work, but I cannot explain all of these in 5 minutes of presentation. For instance, one way how I sometimes feel that others are instrumentalized in this project is that these temporary occupation and people that step into the same model as we do of being given something but offering something back, is that some of these people tend to step into a very passive way of interpreting that position, which actually makes them very, you somehow, they create almost the atmosphere around them that they're instrumentalized. And I find it very difficult because you are given a position where you can potentially link to others and start to create your own conditions, but only if you do that. If you don't do that, indeed, you quickly enter into a discussion where, indeed, all of the wrong things that are happening are also wrong if you consider them wrong and stay with the fact that they are wrong. I mean, I can describe my own position in multiple ways as extremely problematic. Like, I'm not a shareholder of this building, so all of the value I create doesn't belong to me. I am only partial. I only own a partial percentage of the contract of this building, so I can easily be overruled by any decision that others make. So let's say this duality, I think, is something that we have to constantly navigate. It requires a constant discussion. And so there is a kind of responsibility for everyone in the alliance to be aware of that critical, critical difference, and that everyone takes a responsibility of stepping in every time that he or she feels that something goes wrong. And this is indeed what is happening. One thing, for instance, I like very much with the work that OKRM does is that they use the budget for the exhibition and turn it into something else. So what you see here, the future is here, is applying to the exhibition, but can also apply to other things. And I think that's something that we try to do with every single intervention that we do, is that it serves its direct purpose, but it also serves a bigger purpose. I think you can design things like this.
Exactly. I think it's a certain kind of optimism that brings that. You know, it's like not sitting around waiting for like some kind of validation, or even spending your life creating validation, which I think is essentially 75% or maybe more of our community. You know, like broadly speaking, I think this sort of certain kind of just getting on and doing it and thinking not about who owns something, not who has intellectual property, thinking optimistically about everything as a kind of community or a kind of movement, and that there's that would bring the mutual benefit to everyone involved, which is that kind of optimism is why I don't really necessarily relate to anything other than collaboration as a means to work together, because community and collaboration is the state of mind. Alliance feels to me something related more to that could veer into bureaucracy. And I guess I'm interested in that as a discussion here as well, like why this word? I just see it as sort of slightly negative term, but maybe that's something that someone else wants to share.
Well, I'm always happy to. So I think where there's some sort of common element to these slightly uncomfortable relationships these perhaps with the devil is a recognition that these things are going on and they will influence our environment, and they are influencing our environment. And unless we engage with them and start to engage with them in their language and on their terms, but then use that as a way of changing their course, we're not really going to influence the city around us the way places change. Now, bureaucracy is a big part of that. You know, it has been for kind of defining concepts over the 20th century with not only the role of the state, but also corporations. And it's an incredibly powerful force, this rules, codes, policies, they've completely reshaped economies, countries, societies. And unless we can learn how to speak the language of bureaucracy and see that as part of our design tools, we're never gonna go beyond those constraints and limits. So for me, we've got to see bureaucracy as a place where we're not scared to tread and somewhere where design can live. To be able to see things like policies as changeable and designable, and only by doing that will we actually start to change economic systems or the kind of default of what happens in the built environment.
I think you asked earlier about this fear of being an architect and being sidelined as a developer. I mean, if you're at that position making these decisions even at the sideline, that's probably quite a privilege. And a lot of what we're doing is bringing that decision making in architects and much higher upstream so they can start to kind of define and design those rules. And I also think slowness is not always the worst. And sometimes you need time to think about things properly and make sure that the results are benefiting the people you want to benefit. And sometimes when things happen too quickly, people with very kind of who know what they're doing know exactly what they want and will get what they want. So actually slowness and bureaucracy comes from this idea of creating public good for the most amount of people, which I think is really valuable.
I just want to open the discussion up also to the floor. So if anybody has questions, then there will be roving mics.
Hi, thank you so much. This is really exciting. I'm an architect. I just graduated from the City School of University. Your presentation is really fascinating to me. Also because I think if you turn ambiguity on its head, you can also speak of literally exactly the same thing and talk about it from the term of precarity. And how I feel like Tim sort of spoke about it in two ways. He spoke about what language and what tools you have, and whose language you speak, and on whose terms are these things happening. And also you said once you're in the room, which also means there's a certain, privilege that affords you to be inside this room and inside this alliance rather than being outside. So, simplistically put, can you describe what blessings do you count on, where you can afford this position of ambiguity and not precarity or precariousness to say, actually, you will be evicted, in January, and it's only because of the tools that you have, the language that you speak, and the things that you sort of the alliances that you build around it. And if you think of it in those terms, there are several other sort of people who are much less empowered than probably you would be, and like how do you engage those voices in the alliances that you bring? Like how do more empowered people bring lesser empowered people in this conversation? So do you think it's even valid for and I mean, this is both really important.
Well, I think indeed that obviously if you compare me to other people, you could see me as very empowered, and if you compare me to other people, I could be very not empowered. Yeah. So I think, and in this scale of empowerment, there's very different benchmarks to be made. I obviously have a lot of access to empowerment, but also if you frame me in another way, I have very little access. And so I indeed see this kind of empowerment as a process which will take its time and which will need different conversations. And I think every action that you do, I tend to place it on this path of creating possibilities. And the conversation on what potential you create is as important as the conversation on what potential you are not able to create. Because you have to be as much aware of the gaps that you fill as the gaps that you do not fill. But not being able to fill gaps has never been a reason to stop doing things. And I think that's also an important difference in the position we take to how activism in Brussels happens for a long time, which was very much makes me feel very powerless. And I have always tried to focus on things I could do, even if I remain very aware of how little that was. But I think that's the kind of discussion of being optimist but not being naive, or being naive but aware. Maybe that's the best way to put it. That you are naive but also try to be aware about about the fact that you are naive. Because I don't think that's a bad thing. Obviously, as an architect, there's indeed policies are extremely important.
And sorry, and we have a second question here.
So I'm a first year, so I don't know the system, but you keep saying, yeah, it's aimed at you too, I guess. So you keep saying the alliance is for bringing people together because we're in a fractured society, but an alliance is quite a negative word, and you keep saying being sidelined by the developer, or we have to gang up against the developer. So my question is, what is the alliance for? Is the alliance for bringing people together? Is it for being like thuggish and getting your way?
Why do you think alliance is a negative word?
Because I always imagine it as ganging up against someone else, because otherwise you're a community, and an alliance is saying there's an enemy kind of thing.
I wasn't really thinking of it like as such a sort of negative against a particular person or a group, actually. I think for me, when I was practicing as an architect, I was always trying to find practices that will work for both public good. And what I mean by that, so practices that had a kind of social purpose, were dealing with the public, and had at least one woman or person of colour running the practice, so limitations generally. And I think I found it increasingly frustrating that so many decisions are made before the architects actually come on board, and hence we say actually if you're even talking to developers and having those conversations, you're already starting before a decision being made about, you know, what the project is or how much funding is going to go, and that's what, you know, kind of Robert is doing as well. It's really interesting to be at that position as an architect, but quite often what you might find is that you're told you need to design this building which has no affordable housing and they're luxury flats. So I think that for me was why I joined the public sector, because again, I don't feel like I can be naive as who I am. I have to be powerful for people to listen to me, and being in that room, I need to know what I'm talking about. And as an architect, being in that room, you can kind of change the way people are thinking about things in terms of decision making. And for me, that's really powerful. And for me, that is representing wider people and the public.
But I do think it's very important to, for instance, in this project, there's no community, I think. And that might be problematic, but it is the case. And and in that sense, the value is more in between. And the in between might generate community in the longer run, but for now it's indeed only an alliance. And I think it's indeed society is managed and organized in a certain way that it's also been organized to a certain failure, I think. And I think that's what these alliances are trying to creating temporary spaces where you can rewire it. But I wouldn't say alliance is negative. I'm not a native speaker, but I'm quite sure that community, to define it as a group that is clearly defined and which has no in between, I think that there's also a lot of danger in that.
Yeah, and just to follow on from that, I'd say that for me, alliance is much more about just understanding the realpolitik of the difference in people's agendas, and the opposite would be kind of looking for a consensus. So if I was waiting for a consensus for the kind of city I'd like to see developed, which only does work for people who are excluded at the minute, I'd be waiting a very long time. So for me, forming alliances is a way to actually use the system and work with the system, but also of course to have a kind of word of
think we have a question over here.
Hello, I'm working and studying at the same time, so I'm looking at potential opportunities as like architect, or should you actually quit the job and do something else? So this discussion is actually really inspiring, so thank you to all of you. And my question is probably to everyone on the panel. It is about uncertainty that we have today, that we started with. And number one is probably about uncertainty. Is it now helpful for us as architects to negotiate projects with the public and private sector? And if yes or no, what's the difference? And the second one is, what do you think happened on the, let's say, post-Brexit UK? And with European experience as well, what happens on that side as well? Yeah, that's probably the question. Thank you.
Maybe Flaviana or Rory?
Yeah. I mean, uncertainty, it's everywhere, and I think it's not something from our time. It has been always like this, and when you look at someone else, you always think he is more sure than you, but in fact is in the same midst as you, basically. And I would like to, maybe about this question of uncertainty, I would like to take a bit from what Pooja says about like the developers. Like when you look at them, you have the impression that the money gives them confidence, and they are like, you know, they are going to build big things, and they have powers and everything. But then when you for example start to look at forecast and cash flow, like everything is uncertain. Like the value of money is the least certain things in the world, because it's valued all the time. If you look at the value of pound last week, it dropped by 5% just because like Theresa May wasn't able to sign the Brexit. So I mean, there is no certainty, and you have to accept the uncertainty as a condition. But then it's just like, yeah, how do you evaluate in your uncertainty, and how are you sure about certain things? And I think it's what's really interesting about alliances, because to form alliances, you have to be sure about at least one thing. Why do you want to make these alliances, and where do you want to go with all these alliances at some point? And then the rest is like just full of uncertainty everywhere.
I had one question for you, Rory. I was thinking, for this language, you are collaborating with such a range of people within so many fields, among them architects. And I'm thinking, in that process of collaboration with such a diverse body of people, how do you establish a common language, or how do you maneuver in that field together with new people? Like with different methodologies and different approaches to...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, as much as we're working with a lot of different practitioners and disciplines and races, backgrounds, nationalities, ages, etc., actually it's quite easy to find a common language. I think that easy as well, just to clarify, it means that it's possible, because we're all existing in the same moment. So you have to adapt your perspective, obviously, like based on where somebody comes from or what their agenda is. Others have always said that as a practice and maybe as an individual, we have a certain kind of street smart or street wise kind of attitude, which I think that means that we have maybe less of an academic approach or a sort of policy based approach, and more of a kind of human approach, an instinct, let's say, which is quite useful if you're dealing with situations that aren't so poised. You know, a lot of our collaborations occur in a fairly wild state. You know, we're often, even when we're working with institutions, we tend to have this feeling that we're slightly under the radar of the actual institution, and instead creating an alliance or collaboration with somebody that might be within the institution, like inside man, let's say, and forming a kind of conversation which frees them up to use us as a space to have a broader conversation. So I think often we're kind of a hub as a practice between different members of a broad community. Yes, I hope that answers your question.
then I think there's one question from Oscar.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is just on the idea of the usefulness of ambiguity, because we know, we've just been through almost 2 years since the vote for Brexit, and we're probably facing years and years more of uncertainty. And we know that the more constructive ambiguity that either political party engages in a sense, the more trust is eroded in those who are speaking, right? There's a limit to how much you can just say, oh, well, we'll sort it out later on. Or you use language which you know two opposing parties can both find their own meaning in. So my question is, what register do you think we should be, in a sense, trying to gain the trust of other people? Is it that architects, the extent of architects' ambition should be working within the wings, trying to form little alliances with local authorities or with developers or whoever, or actually being in the public and agitating almost on behalf of that public, whether or not you actually have the trust of the public to begin with? So it's just like, that's which domain should we focus our ambition in? Because I don't think it can be both, and I don't think, as Finn says, we can wait around for consensus either.
I'm not sure it's going to answer your question, but a way I think something that probably taught me perhaps too much about the way I worked as an architect was, well, I'm a proper architect. My third year, I was studying at Glasgow School of Art, and I took a year out to go to Hull, so Porto, and went from a school that was all focused on that concepts, no one really knew how to design or build anything, to a school in Porto that was all focused on basically designing something like Alvaro Siza designed it. And I was doing all right at Glasgow, and I approached this year-long project in the same way. And when it came to getting it scored, I was literally, they scored it properly there, and I was bottom of the class, and there was red pen all over my drawings. And I was taken aside for this crisis meeting with my tutor, and just saying, this isn't architecture what you're showing us. You know, you've got to learn how we do it here. So I then I figured out I just had to make it look like Caesar designed it. Showed that back to Glasgow, and they said that you're not going to pass the year if you just design a building that it's just a copy of Caesar. And was stuck in this position where I had to pass both years because the Erasmus had kind of failed, and I needed to do one in Portuguese, one in English, and ended up having to design one building that I could show some sections and some plans of and speak about in one way to Porto, and have the same building that I was able to take different sections of and show to Glasgow, but have one model on my computer and one set of plans, one sort of visualization. And it was probably a terrible building as a result, but it did teach me a lot about how to manage competing agendas. And I personally think that, of course, you need your own framework and sort of compass to what you're doing, but the reality is you're always going to come up against people who you need to be light-footed enough to show what you're doing through their eyes and how it relates to them and how it benefits them or doesn't. And that's certainly something we've been conscious of with public practice in a political sense. We developed the idea for public practice under Boris Johnson. It got funded and approved under Sadiq Khan. They both supported it. So we were able to talk about the project in quite a wide political register. And in that sense, and that's vital for its continued success, because politics will change again and will change depending on what scale we operate on nationally.
Yeah, I think this ability to keep your ideas but to decline it toward your public is really important. It also makes you how alliances are working at some point. I mean, if you have this objective and this vision, then you have to know what's your audience and how to trigger your audience at some points to convince him, because you don't convince an architect the same way as you convince the developers, but you can convince them for the same project at some point.
So we have one question from Caroline.
Questioning whether there is an equilibrium or a balance that is
vital to the production of that public practice, because where we keep talking about there's always a good or bad, or like the architect has always the better ideas, or the ideas that are most considered rather than the developer or the state or the council. And for example, last year in G10 we were working very closely with Lambeth Council, and it was very refreshing to have council people sitting at the table and actually telling us how much they were sharing the ideas that were being generated in the unit and all these things, and somehow that de-idealization of the state and the government I find very productive. And I was wondering if in the sort of practice that you're developing, there's importance for balance and everybody having some, there's not an upper hand from the architect, from the state, or from any party really.
I think it goes back to what our kind of talk was about this idea of being humble and being able to listen and being able to kind of, I think, facilitate conversations. I think that's a lot of what architectural skill is as well, is to be able to bring everyone together for a collective vision. But what we're saying, that vision doesn't necessarily come from you as an architect, but actually a collective vision from multiple different people's point of views. And I think we do need to get away from this idea of like good and bad, and kind of, it's just the world is so much more nuanced and so much more complicated, and human relationships are so complicated. And I do think it is more about listening and trying to get somewhere together. If that sounds naive, I'll take that.
But I think we need to recognise what comes before us in terms of our reputations as architects. So I was talking at the annual conference of the Town and Country Planning Association on Thursday, and I was talking about exactly Pooja's point about the importance of humility, as we found, and how we test for humility in our programme. And the person on the panel next to me said, well, I guess that rules out most architects. And it was probably the comment that got the biggest laugh of the whole conference. But we've got to be aware that our profession comes with expectations of, that we're going to be the opposite, if not humble, and we aren't known for being particularly good at listening. I think those are the kind of skills that schools like this should be teaching far more than how to create a singular vision that everyone else has to get behind.
I think we have time for a final question. There's one with a microphone over there.
I was going to say that I'm quite new to basically all of this. I'm really at the beginning of the whole process. And I was going to say that when we talk about alliance, there are two interpretations. It can be a positive and beneficial alliance, or it can be, like you were saying, a brutish and quite negatively impacting alliance. And alliances can obviously be the groundwork. You're saying there's no community. Alliances could be the future of community. So when we're trying to build like an open atmosphere, and we do have opposing forces to our vision, we can't always necessarily bring those people around to our side or understand their side or have a compromise. How do we kind of avoid being the brutish alliance when we have forces opposing what we have as our vision? And that's really for everyone.
I think in general in the architectural discipline there's maybe one thing that I don't think is managed very well is to separate intentions from solutions. And architects tend to defend solutions a lot and are not very well at constructing a dialogue around intentions. And that could help to, I think, to be humble and totally, how do you call it, voluntaristic about your ambitions at the same time. Because, for instance, what you do at the World Trade Center wouldn't work if the intentions of doing something different, radically different in the North District wouldn't be supported by the developers. But so we share this common purpose, but we completely disagree for now on the way how to do it. And this is the humbleness we need to create a space to find out what could be a good solution. And I think this is maybe the way how we should structure the discussion much more. some topics or discussions are fit for some moments in time and others are fit for other moments in time. And to structure this discussion on multiple levels, that's, I think, a very important design also.
Did you have a last word, Rory?
No,
On
I
that note,
really like that. I agree. I think that our experience of working with architects on various levels is, luckily now, we've found some architects that we really appreciate in terms of their ability to have like very rounded, open conversations, and also appreciate other cultures that exist in the contemporary, like arts and crafts, even in industrial processes and curatorial activities, etc. But I still think that there's a hangover, certainly in the UK, for what Finn was bringing up earlier, this kind of Starchitect kind of like heyday, which I think a lot of young architects that are now maybe at the point where they're starting to practice are kind of slightly crippled by, and we speak a lot to them about it. They're trying to get over this trying to de-teach themselves in a sense, or open their minds to like new possibilities of practice, which I don't find, having met some of the students or young architects here, having been teaching a little bit with Jack in his class, and I feel like there's a real open-mindedness emerging, which is super kind of beautiful, actually, if I may say so, because it offers a new possibility for the future of architecture, which is great.
I think on that beautiful note, we'll end tonight's conversation and thank Flavien, Rory, Freek, Pooja, and Finn so much for this discussion. So. And this, we'll be back. Oh, is there still a bit of sound? And we'll be back in the spring for the last session out of 3. But thank you so much, everybody, also for joining the conversation, the ones that had questions. Thanks for tonight.